Okay, hi, welcome to my arc guide. I'm going to go over my passive tree and gear first, and then show a bit of gameplay, and then go over the skill gems first, the ones I'm using right now, and then the leveling setup, how you would progress that. Alright, let's start with my passive tree. For Ascendancy I went Stormweaver. I grabbed the 2 Arcane Surge nodes first, then the double shock, strike twice, and then Scouring Winds for an additional minus 20% on exposure. That's the baseline. Basically, it doubles the exposure value. Alright, and for the passive tree, I went up here. Spell damage, lightning damage first, cast speed, then energy shield. I went up this way, doesn't matter if you go left or right. Grab these 3. And then I went up. For leveling, I would definitely grab Breath of Lightning and Potent Incantation first. Otherwise, if you're already in Endgame, you can already grab the critical stuff. You usually don't grab it while leveling, because Controlled Destruction is just such a good support early on. Yeah, otherwise just Energy Shield, Intelligence, Mana Regen, some crit, more damage. These 3 are really good to get 1 extra chain, which increases arc damage, lightning damage and cast speed. More mana and mana scaling, more energy shield, more int, which scales mana. And yeah, you want all 3 here up here. 1 to shock, to do more damage, and some lightning pen. Even though lightning penetration doesn't do anything once you have the curse and exposure up, it does help the ball lightning actually apply a shock and such an exposure on enemies that have high lightning resistance. Otherwise, you run into the problem where you don't even apply any shock, you don't apply any exposure, and then you actually need the penetration. And then jewel sockets, because they are always really good. Yeah, and for leveling you go, as I said, you grab Potent Incantation, Breath of Lightning, go up here, grab these first, then go up here, grab these 3 wheels, and then you go to the left, grab this, and this, especially these 3 notables are extremely good. But these up here are even better. So you go up here first, and then you go over here and grab more energy shield, cast speed, crit, more energy shield. You really want Hallowed for 20% of maximum energy shield as extra stun threshold. Otherwise the build doesn't feel great at endgame when you are mainly energy shield. And for Anoint on my amulet, I grab Self Mortification for the same reason. It's just more stun threshold. If you want something cheaper, you can go Open Mind, which is Guild Aya. But this is also pretty cheap. Aya Envy is really easy to get in SSF. I imagine it's also really cheap on trade. Alright, then let's go over my gear. For a weapon, you just want the usual stuff. Spell damage, lightning, spell skills. And the extra damage as lightning is okay to have, but it's really not great. Basically it's just a 2-stat wand, but the +4 levels is really rare and really good. And then the rest of the gear is just mana, energy shield, some life. And you want some life for its use disdain. This helmet is not that rare, but it's extremely powerful because of the 28% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. If I take it off, I have 9,700. I lose, 2,500 energy shield just because of that. And the 21% of damage taken bypasses energy shield is really good, because it makes some damage go through, but not all of it, and I can then use my life flask to fill it back up, while you can't really use the life flask for your energy shield. Alright. And yeah, rest of the gear is just resistance, life, mana, and energy shield. And then for the amulet, I use the Everlasting Gaze. It's a bit more rare from what I can tell, and it also gives a lot of energy shield. As you can see, it's like, what, almost 3,000, 2,800. but you can use just a normal rare. For example, I might use this if it ever gets nerfed, and it's less, but you also get other good stats on an amulet. Just energy shield, mana, some resistance, and mana regeneration. If you also want, ideally, mana regeneration on your ring, I have max roll on this one, and it's 82% from just one ring, which is a ton. So yeah, and shield and just damage again. Spell damage, lightning damage, and spell skills. So yeah, that's the gear and the tree, now some gameplay. Alright, here's some Arc gameplay. I'm just going to explain the build. So I'm doing tier 17 basically. Tier 15 Waystone plus 2 monster level. It also has damages Exile Chaos, which is the most dangerous mod for this build, so I'm playing a bit more careful than usually. As you can see, just basically, if there's a big pack, we use Mana Tempest, otherwise just running through using Arc. Nothing else. It just melts everything on its own. And that's basically the whole playstyle. I do have a boss on this map, and you can see what's going on there. You add in ball lightning and connectivity, shock, expose, and reduce their resistance. But yeah, otherwise really smooth playstyle. Not really much to think about. I did try out mobility support instead of inspiration on this map, which is why my mana keeps dropping. If I use inspiration, it's basically always at 100%, and I really don't have to bother much with it. As you can see, I have almost 10,000 energy shield, 1,400 life, which is being used thanks to the helmet, which makes, I think, 21% of the damage I take go through my energy shield, which means I could get one shot through my energy shield and still have like 4,000 left, but those one shots basically don't exist in pure E2. It's just a lot of hits, and you have the time to heal up with some life flask. And yeah, here's the boss, as you can see. Just some connectivity every now and then, more lightning when the shock falls off. And it just melts. It's more than enough damage, considering this is on the level 82, 81 boss. So yeah, that's basically it. There's another breach here. Oh yeah, right, I get a shrine first. Then there's a breach. You can see how it clears that one. As I said, usually I'm not playing as carefully just because I've got extra damage as chaos on this map. But I didn't want to show a super easy map to make it look like the build is crazy good. It's still really good. I prefer it over Spark. I know most people play Spark, but Arc has served me well so far. Alright, then let's do the breach. Like exactly the same, just in breaches you don't really have the time to cast conductivity and ball lightning, so I just spam Arc and mana damage basically. And having fun dodging detonate deaths. Oh yeah, that's the playstyle. Now let's go over to the gems. Alright, so for the gems, let's go with my endgame setup first. And then I'm going to go over how you start off level 1 to all the way to endgame, basically. So what I'm currently using is Arc, Arcane Tempo, Unleash, Elemental Focus, Considered Casting, and Inspiration. As I mentioned, I was trying out Mobility, but only because I've got 586 mana per second. So yeah, it takes a lot of mana. I would not really recommend it. And then more Lightning, Lightning Exposure, Strip Away, Conduction, and Inevitable Critical, just to apply shock consistently. Then Mana Tempest, Premeditation, it's your staple, you always use that. Then Archmage, you use that once you get to 100 Spirit. And you can fit in Lightning Mastery, because it's free. And I have 151 Spirit thanks to my chest, so I add in Clarity. If you don't have, you don't need Clarity. Same with Grim Feast, it's extremely good to get Grim Feast, but if you don't have any plus 30 Spirit on your gear, just drop it. But try to get it later. And then Conductivity, Heightened Curse, Focus Curse, Burning Inscription, and that's it. I also use Blink on my weapon swap. You can set it to just be on weapon set 2, so I can just weapon swap, Blink, and then go back. But it's not necessary, it's just nice to have sometimes to get down ledges and such. Alright, now over to the leveling setup. So let's go over the gems and the leveling setup first. So at level 1 you don't have Arc, so you go with Spark, which you get at level 1, and Flame Wall with your second uncut skill gem. You really want Flame Wall because it gives each projectile that goes through it a lot of extra damage. Even if it's fire damage, it's still a lot. So you just put the Flame Wall in front of you or near the boss, shoot your Spark through it, and it's way better. So for support gems, for Spark, you want Control Destruction as the first one, and then Arcane Tempo. For Flame Wall you can use Fortress support once you unlock it, but it's not that important. It just makes the Flame Wall go in a circle instead of a line. It makes it easier to make sure that the Spark goes through it before it hits the boss. And then later on, once you get tier 3 gems, you get Orb of Storms, which you can place down. It creates an orb. Control it. And every time you cast a lightning spell inside of it, it strikes an additional time, which is why it's a lot of extra damage on single target. So you grab that once you get level 3 gems, and you add Considered Casting. And if you want, as a support, you can cast add Overabundance. What that does is it lets you put down 2 Orb of Storms instead of just 1. So it basically just doubles the damage, but they last only half as long. As you can see, they are gone really quickly. I tried it out, I didn't really like it, but in theory it's more damage. Alright. And then, once you get to the middle of Act 2, you can start using Arc. You get Arc once you get Uncut Gems level 7, I think, or level 5. But it's not really that great at that point. So you really want to stick to Spark, Flame Wall, and Orb of Storms at that point. And not really swap to Arc until you get level 9 Uncut Gems, at which point you have access to Mana Tempest. Mana Tempest is a buff. It's a lot of text, but basically, as long as you stand inside of it, it drains your mana, but it gives extra chains, extra damage, and it makes your Arc hit multiple enemies at once every time it jumps to a new one. So it's really good, especially for Arc, and in combination with Orb of Storms, which also chains to nearby enemies. So that's when you swap to Arc, when you get Mana Tempest at level 9. Skill games, level 9. So then we go over to Arc. And for Arc, you also use Control Destruction and Arcane Tempo. And if you get a jeweler orb, you add Unleash. You can add Unleash before that, instead of Arcane Tempo, but it has a 150% mana multiplier, which can be really annoying to use. So just try it out yourself. If you think your mana is fine, then use Unleash, otherwise go back to Arcane Tempo. So at that point you can ditch Flame Wall, you no longer need it, but Orb of Storms is still a staple, still the same supports. Considered casting Overabundance. If you don't like Overabundance and putting down 2 but they don't last very long, you can go with Conduction instead, which gives a better chance to shock enemies, which increases their damage taken. And then, as I mentioned before, you use Mana Tempest, Premeditation as support, which just adds more damage while you are inside of it, and Inspiration to make it cost less. These were both strength supports, as you can see. So if you don't have enough strength, just grab 1 or 2 small nodes with strength instead of intelligence. Alright, and then at level Uncut Gems level 7 you get Conductivity, which you start using with Spark, but you use all throughout the endgame later on. You link it with Heightened Curse, which just makes it better, and Focus Curse, which makes it erupt quicker. So basically if you put down a curse like this, it takes a second to activate basically, and only once it activates it's actually doing anything to whatever is in there. And if you add Focus Curse, it just activates quicker. And then for Spirit Gems, early on, use your first Uncut Spirit Gem. Once you get it, you can use Grim Feast, which is really nice for survivability, because it gives you an energy shield whenever you kill an enemy and they leave a little soul behind. And this energy shield buff lasts forever, until you get hit. But basically you can grab a bunch of them before a boss fight and have a really big shield as you go in. And this is basically your main setup until you get to Cruel difficulty. So for the normal campaign, you basically just use Arc, Orb of Storms and Mana Tempest. And that's what got me through and Conductivity. Almost forgot. And that's what got me through normal campaigns. Act 2 is a bit rough. Don't try the Trial of Sekima too early, but once you get towards the end of it, it should be fine. Might take a few tries, but you'll get used to it. Alright. And then on towards Cruel difficulty. You basically keep everything the same, but once you get an extra 30 spirit from the Bog Witch in Act 3. This one gives another 30 spirit, so you have 60. You can consider using Blasphemy and put your curse in there. You just put an unlinked Conductivity in there, and then it reserves 60 spirits that you have. But it makes the curse a lot worse, like 44% less effect. It's even worse at lower levels. So, and you also lose the Heightened Curse, so the 25% increased effect. So it basically makes it less than half as good. But it doesn't cost mana, importantly, and it's just automated. You can use it, otherwise just use Grim Feast and also add in Clarity. There is a support for it. You can just add it, it gives mana regeneration rate while it's active and has a bit with mana. Alright, and then in Cruel basically nothing much changes at first. Once you feel like your arc itself does enough damage thanks to your passive tree, you should swap out Orb of Storms and put in Ball Lightning instead. Because That's what I'm using at Endgame right now. Lightning. Because Ball Lightning has 750% more chance to shock. And you basically only press it once to shock the enemy. And then you go back to spamming Arc while you are using Mana Tempest to buff your damage. So this is important during Cruel because at the end of Act 3 normal, you get access to lightning exposure, which is massive. It adds minus 20% to the resistance of an enemy, but to get it, you have to shock. And that's why the 750% more chance to shock from Ball Lightning is so good. So once you get to Cruel, you want to add that Ball Lightning, lightning exposure, and then another support strip away, and considered casting as a third one. If you have trouble shocking the enemy with your Ball Lightning, you can, instead of strip away, use conduction, because you have to make sure that the Ball Lightning actually shocks the enemy, otherwise you don't even get the exposure and strip away does nothing. So that's basically your endgame setup for leveling. Arc, Control Destruction, Arcane Tempo, Unleash, Ball Lightning, Lightning Exposure, Conduction, Consider Casting, or instead of Conduction, Strip Away, Mana Tempest, Premeditation, Inspiration, and Connectivity, Heightened Curse, and Focused Curse, and then Grim Feast. And once you basically finish the campaign, at the end of Cruel, when you kill the Bog Witch again, you go up to 100 Spirit, and that's when you use Archmage instead of Grim Feast. It just a buff that gives you a bunch of damage. I have Clarity in there because I have extra Spirit on my gear, but you probably won't be able to fit that in, so just Archmage, nothing else. No Grim Feast, no Blasphemy. You just have exactly 100 Spirit for it. Alright, and then once you are well into endgame, you can stop, or you can start going crit damage, which is when I drop Control Destruction, because it says your skills cannot deal critical hits. And then I still use Unleash, Arcane Tempo, and I start using Elemental Focus, which means that your arc can no longer shock, but you still have your Ball Lightning to do that. So you add in Elemental Focus, and then it depends on your mana sustain. So if you get a Greater Jeweler Orb, at the start I added Inspiration, just so I can sustain the mana more easily. But you can also add Lightning Mastery, for example, just to do more damage instead. But as a last spot, you definitely want Inspiration. It's just really good. Do not have to spend that much mana on everything.